Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana, zerilli-marimò. My name is Stefano Albertini. I'm the director of Casa Italiana. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for the launch of Valentina Castellani's new book, Trading Beauty, Our Market Histories from the Altar to the Gallery. It's also a great pleasure to welcome Valentina here. She is somebody who's very familiar with this place. Among other things that she does, she's also an active member of our advisory board. She's also the co-chair of the Board of Trustees of the Drawing Center here in New York. But we start saying that Valentina comes from Turin. She's a proud Torinese, and that's where she started her academic career studying classics and archaeology. The way she moved from classic and archaeology to contemporary art is going to be discussed during our conversation. And I just want to say that she built her career in contemporary art first at Sotheby's for about 5 years. And then when she moved to New York at Gagosian, where she was one of the directors, she was responsible, among many other things, for organizing 5 historical exhibits, one of which, the one on Manzoni, won basically the prize for best art exhibit outside of a museum for that year. And the 2 about Picasso and many, many others. You can see her whole CV on our website. But this book was originated by her latest enterprise, that is teaching. After she left Gagosian and she became an independent art dealer, she accepted the invitation of the Steinert School here at New York University to teach in the master program for art administration. And she teaches exactly this, how art and galleries are related and how the gallery world shaped the art world. So she didn't find a textbook for her course, so she wrote one. And that's exactly what we are presenting here tonight. But far from being a boring textbook, and we who teach are very familiar with those, she wrote a book that is also a pleasure to read, and it's almost like an adventure in the development of the art world. Far from the puritanism, we can say, that always kept separated art from the market. So we are very grateful to Valentina for the book she wrote, published by Gagosian here, but also published at the same time in Italy, right? And we invite you to read the book. The book is upstairs for sale, and Valentina will sign you copies at the end of the talk. So we're going to have her presentation now that basically she's going to adventure in one of the sections that she touches upon in the book, Impressionism, as considered a pivotal point in the change of the dynamics between the art and the commerce or the gallery. And then there's going to be a conversation that she will engage with Michael Cary, her former colleague at Gagosian, that I will introduce when he comes up to the stage. Please welcome Valentina Castellani.
Thank you, Stefano, for this very generous introduction. It is indeed a pleasure to do the first presentation of my book at the Casa Italiana. I also would like to thank Julian Sachs for helping organizing this event, Melissa Rackler-Burt from the Steinert course where I teach, and Emily Long, and of course Larry Gagosian and its fantastic publication team led by Alison MacDonald, my editor Priya Bhatnagar, and Shori, who all help putting this book together. So my book starts from the premise that art that we love, that touches us, that emotions us, was never created in a vacuum. In my book, I analyzed the different market models within which art was produced. Market models that were the product of different religious, historical, cultural, social circumstances. From the different market model derive the different art values, and also the status of the artist that changed substantially from the Middle Ages, that is the starting point of my book, until now. What I would like to discuss tonight with you is a pivotal moment in the art market and art language that is represented by the emergence of the Impressionist movement in Paris. We are in Paris in the second half of the 19th century. Actually, the Impressionists started to operate around 1860, 1870, and their new language was really coupled with the establishment of a new market and approval system. So the affirmation, the emergency of the Impressionist language is really a pivotal model in the history of the art market, because it's the first time that a model centers on the figure of the dealer, the art dealer, the modern galleries that we will see is embodied by the person of Paul Durand-Ruel emerges. So, so first of all, we love Impressionists. We all know them. Their exhibitions are blockbusters. They are sought after by the market. They established huge prizes at auction. This is one of the highest prize for a water lilies that is one of Monet's typical subjects. This is Renoir, au Moulin de la Galette, Degas, Mary Cassatt, with Berthe Morisot was one of the only two women in the original movement. So for us, it's difficult to think that when they started painting, when they started actually painting en plein air, that means on open air, their language was perceived as so radical, so revolutionary, a language that was going against all established rules. But so who decided what good art was? And how was also art sold and bought? So in Paris, that was at the time the center of the art market, not only of the art market, but of the art world. The body that decided taste, content, subject was the Académie des Beaux-Arts, the Academy of Fine Arts. The Académie des Beaux-Arts had been founded in 1648 as a free association of painters, but very quickly it had fallen under the control, the direct control of the crown. It is the time of Louis XIV, the king's son, who was actually and very smartly taking through his finance minister complete control of the art production, because he understood what potent, mean, and tool of propaganda art was. And so they named a director of the Académie des Beaux-Arts, Charles Lebrun, and they started to establish very strict rule of content and style. In terms of content, the subjects that were considered more noble, more important, were historical, mythological, allegorical paintings. This is Jean-Louis Lavide, The Death of Socrates, that is here in the Metropolitan Museums, or another subject inspired by ancient Romans, Cleopatra. In terms of style, the style that was favored was a very realistic style with realistic colors applied in small brushstrokes. Brushstroke didn't have to be visible. So it was a very formalized style. And the Academy really dominated for 2 centuries the life of the arts in Paris. And Paris at the time was indeed the center of the Western art world. So not only the Academy organized annual salons. The salon, in particular, the most important one was the Salon du Louvre. And those salons were really important because it was the only venue where new art could be exhibited. At the time, the only museums that was devoted to contemporary art was the Musée du Luxembourg, where only 2 works by one artist could be exhibited at the same time. And it was, you think, a time before contemporary exhibition, before biennials, before any kind of exhibition opportunities. So to be accepted in the salon was for an artist the only possibility of showing their work. That meant also to find possible buyers and commission. So market and the academy were strongly related. It was really a centralized system of approval and market. So all the artists wanted to be part of the salon. They would submit their work, and many of them were rejected. The starting point, a breaking point happened in 1863, when the number of artists that were refused by the official jury of the salon was that big that Napoleon III, who was at the time the ruler of France, decided to allow the institution of a Salon of the Refuse, Salon des Refusés, where the artist that had been rejected would be shown. The Salon des Refusés was a big succès de scandale, as they say in French. Everybody went to see it. The number of women included was 13%, so 50 women. And at the time, I want to remind you that women were only allowed anyway in the academy in the number of 4 for a year, and they could not take part in classes with nude made models. So being an artist, and this is one of the themes that runs through my book, being an artist for a woman came with a lot of restriction and a lot of obstacle to be dealt with. So the Salon des Refusés was where the artists that had not been accepted had the opportunity of showing. One of them was Manet. Manet is actually considered by the Impressionists as their father, although Manet never took part in the movement. He never exhibited in the 8 group exhibitions that the Impressionists organized by themselves, but he was already pushing the boundary. He was already going against the accepted rules. This is the painting, Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, Luncheon on the Grass, that was actually considered outrageous. It was such a scandal that it had to be cordoned off and guard had to be put in front of it because people were actually physically attacking it. So why do you think it was so outrageous? Well, I'm going to show you. This was an accepted nude. This is Cabanel, Alexandre Cabanel, and it was exhibited in the official salon. It won prizes, and it was bought by Napoleon III. This is Venus, who was born from the foam of the sea, and this is actually an idealized nude. There is nothing that reminds of reality. Her body is painted according to the ideal aesthetic of the time. This, on the contrary, is a naked woman. This is a woman who has arrived there to have this picnic with these 2 men. She has taken off her clothes that are discarded on the floor. The 2 men are completely dressed, and the model was a recognizable Parisian. Her name was Victorine Meurant, who modeled for Manet several times. And what is going on is not clear. So there are a lot of elements that were really annoying for the public. There is a hint of a narrative, but is not explained what is going on. There is a figure on the background that is actually prospectively wrong. She's too big. And also another thing that was really perceived as outrageous is the fact that this model, who was actually, a courtesan, is staring directly at us. So instead of being, the depiction of a nude that is looked at by mainly men, she really uproots the male gaze. She's the one who looks defiantly at us. Anyway, this painting was considered bad in every sense. Composition, the way it was depicted, and it never found a buyer during Manet's time. It is now in the Musée d'Orsay, as it is another outrageous painting that is Olympia, that is inspired by classical reclining nudes, but Manet is giving us here his interpretation of the theme. There is a black servant who is bringing this woman, who was probably a prostitute, flowers, mainly from a client. So the Salon des Refusés in 1863 marks really a moment of disruption, a moment that would be a turning point, a moment of not coming back. After that, other independent salons would be organized. Naturally, the salons organized by the Academy would still be organized, and it's actually interesting to see that all these artists that had been, like Manet, for example, continue to submit their work to the official salon because they wanted to obtain what was considered an official recognition. But not only the art was changing, it was Paris who was changing. Paris was undergoing profound change. It was the time when the Baron Haussmann was really redesigning the city. Paris was still, for many aspects, a middle-aged city, and the Baron Haussmann took down entire areas, and basically he designed the Paris that we see now with this Grand Boulevard that connects different parts of the city. He built stations. And it's also the time of the rising bourgeoisie. So this kind of style is considered obsolete. When a group of young painters, and the original group in the original group there were Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Frédéric Basile. They are four youngers. They meet in Paris. They are all young. They had not been admitted in the official academy, and so they were studying with one of the independent academies that were flourishing in Paris. They were intolerant to the rules. So what they do is they start wandering the countryside. They start paint what they saw. And they start to paint in a style that was very different from the accepted academic style. It's interesting to notice that a technical innovation had just happened. That means the invention of synthetic colors in tubes. So instead of bringing heavy jars with grounded colors, painters for the first time could bring tubes of colors, and they were spending time depicting the variation of lights, the fleeting effects of life. This is one of Monet's most famous subjects, which is the repetition of the same subject in different atmospheric conditions. So Monet would work at the same time on different canvases. So there was a canvas where he would paint from 9 to 10 in the morning to capture the morning light. And then he would move to the noon canvas and different seasons. So really the idea is to capture the fleeting atmosphere, the fleeting light. And if you think also the transient of light itself. As I said, Paris was undergoing profound changes. And besides countryside, the Impressionists, this is a beautiful sentence for me. For me, a landscape doesn't exist in its own right. The surrounding atmosphere brings it to life. So what they wanted to depict was also the life that they saw around us, the life of the middle class. This is a leisure moment of a group of friends, a group of people that has gathered in this. This was a restaurant just outside Paris, and it's not a static painting. What Impressionists did was to convey this idea that life is in constant change, and they really wanted a style that was able to reflect the modern life. The modern life needed a new language, and this is what the Impressionists try to develop. The reaction of the Academy, the train station were another theme beloved by the Impressionists for many reasons. One is because it was a modern theme. Train station were, and trains in general, were new means of transportation. Haussmann had built several train stations in different parts of Paris. So the Gare Saint-Lazare has been painted by Monet, by Manet, by Caillebotte. And you can see they loved it also because there is all these smokes that renders the images so flux, so undetermined. So the Impressionists are able to develop a language to talk about a new word, a word that is changing, and is the word of the, as I said before, of the emerging bourgeoisie. This is another very typical subject by Degas, who painted many of these ballerinas, and usually he caught them not during the performance, but when they are when they are trying, when they are waiting. Berthe Morisot, as I said at the beginning, with Mary Cassatt, was one of the only two women in the original group, and they were coming from upper class, and they were not allowed as such to wander on their own in the countryside or to take part in the lives of the café. So they usually focus on domestic theme. So the new language by the Impressionists was received as scorn, ridicule. It was rejected. These artists, there are letters, for example, written by Monet, in which he says that he's starving, he doesn't have the money to take care of his family, he doesn't have the money to buy food. So, as I said at the beginning, not being accepted by the Academy meant not be accepted in the market system. So the Impressionists organized the first exhibition by themselves in 1874 in the vacated studio of a photographer called Nadar. Each of the artists had to pay a fee in order to be exhibited. And what is interesting, and there was a very interesting exhibition organized 2 years ago for the bicentennial of the exhibition at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, is that it was a very mixed group, this first exhibition. First of all, the Impressionists didn't call themselves Impressionists yet. The term would be given by a critic in despise for a painting by Monet, Impression Soleil Levant, Impression Sunrise, and then it stuck and it became the name of the group. The group didn't have a manifesto or an agenda. We know, for example, that later on in the 20th century, there would be movements like, for example, the Futurists or the Surrealists that had a clear take on how art should be. They would publish their manifestos. The Impressionists, in the end, were just a group of, some of them were friends, some other were not friends, just wanted to find new ways to paint, but also new ways to reach the public in order to find a market. So the exhibition was, again, very successful in terms of attendance. People went there basically to laugh about the Impressionists. They went there to express their scorn. It was a selling exhibition, and I think only 3 or 4 of the paintings sold. So Impressionists were probably doomed to fail until this guy, Paul Durand-Ruel, who is really considered the first dealer in the modern sense of the word, the first gallerist, met in London in 1870 when he was waiting out the France-Prussian War. He met Monet and Pissarro by chance. He was a gallerist. He had a gallery in Paris. He had opened an outpost there while he was waiting for the war to end, and he met Monet and Pissarro. He was immediately attracted by what the Impressionists were doing, and he decided to represent them. He decided to promote them. When he went back to Paris, he was introduced to the other members of the group, and he started to buy in bulk. So Paul Durand-Ruel basically bet big on this group. In his memoir, he said, everybody thought I had gone crazy. And he started to put in practice principles that are still basically at the core of the activity of a gallery. First of all, creating monopolies, or at least to put together a substantial inventory of the artists that he represented. Second, well, he was giving artist stipends, salaries. This is something that, for example, Leo Castelli would still do. Leo Castelli is the artist that in the 60s promoted the generation of Jasper Johns, Rauschenberg, Warhol. It's something that is not done anymore, although galleries do participate usually in the production expenses. And then he understood the importance of educating the public. The public didn't understand the Impressionists. If the public didn't understand the Impressionists, they would never buy their work. So he started to produce catalog, he started to produce books, and he started to exhibit them. He started to organize monographic and group exhibition. As I said before, monographic exhibition, that means an exhibition of the work of just one artist, were very uncommon practice at the time. And at the beginning, again, they were received with surprise, with scorn. But then, the practice took on. And so slowly a market started to develop. But Paul Durand-Ruel's intuition and what really is considered to have made the success of the movement is when in 1885, he accepted the invitation of the American Art Association to exhibit for the next year, to put together an exhibition of Impressionists in New York. So Durand-Ruel went to New York, and in 1886, an exhibition called Works by the Impressionists of Paris opened, and it was indeed a great success. Many sales, a very good response from the critics and the public. And this is really considered the turning point that determined the appreciation and not only critical but market of the movement. And it was really the success there that reverberated in France and in Europe. And From this moment on, Impressionists started to be successful on the market. So this model that is very much the model that has remained. There are many colleagues from Gagosian here, where we all worked. So a gallery still what it does is put together exhibition of the artists that they represent. They hope, they try to have the biggest inventory and to build an international market. So a gallery what tries to do is, on a hand, create value and coordinate in belief. And I'm saying these are two economics terms because I've been recently asked by two distinguished economists that are really in the public, Alessandra Fogli and Marianne Farbodi, to write a real paper, a real economic paper. I mean, they're going to write the mathematical model. But what is interesting is that this case of the Impressionists succeeding and uprooting an old market and an old market and an old language is a perfect example of creative distraction. That is another economic term that was coined by Joseph Schumpeter, who was an Austrian economist that died in 1950, and then further developed by Philippe Aghion, who won the Nobel Prize last year for that. Creative distraction is basically a model in which innovation continuously disrupt old models to create new and better ones. And this is what the Impressionists did. This is a very, very, in my opinion, a very interesting example that when we look at a painting, when we look at art, we cannot only consider the aesthetic qualities or what they convey in terms of emotion, in terms of beauty. Of course, those are things that are still there, that are important, but that works of art were creating within a market model. Works of art were creating not in a vacuum, as I said at the beginning, but by responding and sometimes challenging ideas and models of social, religious, political, and historical circumstances. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Valentina. And while we set up for the conversation, I would like to tell you a couple of things about Michael. Michael Cary, as I said, he's the director at Gagosian. He started working there actually with Valentina as part of the research team with whom they organized several exhibits, including on Picasso. And he recently is responsible for the current Gagosian exhibit on Jasper Johns, so that you can see in the Gagosian Gallery. Here in Chelsea, Michael?
No, Uptown.
Uptown, Gagosian Uptown.
Yes.
And we are delighted that Michael has accepted our invitation to talk with Valentina about her book. Please.
Thank you. Hi. Does that work? All right, Valentina. You've had a long and very interesting career in the commercial art world, but you are now teaching, and we are at NYU, and so I wonder if you could start by talking about what you studied, where you studied, and how that led you into working in the art world.
Yes, of course. First of all, I want to say that it is a real pleasure to do this with Michael because we work together on so many exhibitions at Gagosian. We put together 5 Picasso exhibitions together and one Manzoni one, and he's one of my dearest friends in the world. I've always had a passion for art, and in Italy, where I grew up, I studied history of art at the university. And actually, I did my dissertation in ancient Greek art and archaeology. So I specialized for something that was very far away from where my career would develop. Then, after a stint at various precarious jobs in Italy. I moved to London for love, to follow Gianluca, who at the time was not my husband, but is my husband now. And I landed at Sotheby's, where I did an internship in the contemporary department, and then I was offered a job as a junior cataloger, which is the lower step of the ladder. So what I was doing was cataloging works of art that would be sold at auction. It was a great school because I learned a lot. And one thing that I would like to highlight is the fact that until then, I'd never thought about the market. I mean, when I was studying art history in Italy, I was studying art in terms of masterpieces, in terms of works of geniuses, which undoubtedly they are, but I was never taught that these works were produced and sold in a certain way. So, for example, if you go to the Met, where there is this remarkable exhibition of Raphael, all of those works exist because there was somebody who told Raphael to paint those works. A pope, he worked at the court of Giulio II in Rome, or a rich banker, or a prince. None of the works by Renaissance artists, by Middle Ages artists that we see in museums everywhere were ever produced because an artist went to their studio, wait for inspiration, and then look for a buyer. Each of those works were produced within restriction. There were commissions that sometimes were sometimes the commission were decided by a verbal agreement, sometimes it was a written agreement, but anyway, they were commissioned. So for a work of art to exist at the time, you needed somebody to tell an artist to make a work of art. So as a consequence, artists were indeed, particularly in the Middle Ages and early Renaissance, considered artisans because they were working with their hands. For example, in Florence, painters belonged to the guild of the apothecaries because they would buy their pigments in the same place where apothecaries would buy them, or sculpture were part of the guild of the stone cutters. So the status of the artist was very different than it is now, and this is something I highlight in my book. But to go back to me, after working 5 years at Sotheby's, in the meantime I was promoting to Business Getter. That meant that I would try to dig up works for the auctions. I moved to New York, where I was poached by Larry Gagosian, and that was the best part of my career. I worked for Larry for 11 years. Those, I think, were really glorious times because the gallery was expanding. It was not as big as it is now. We only had, when I started, Los Angeles, London, and New York. And also, what we started to do, and I think in that Gagosian was really a pioneer, is to put together this incredibly important historical exhibition. So we were actually starting to operate in a territory that usually was the territory of museums. I don't know if you want to talk about this now or later.
I mean, sure, why not? I mean, since we're there.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I started working at Gagosian as a researcher for Valentina, but it was at a time when Valentina was organizing both the first Picasso exhibition with John Richardson and the first Manzoni retrospective to happen in the U.S. Two very, very ambitious museum-y kind of shows. And there's a whole chapter in your book about that model, in a sense. And I'm wondering, because there's a big difference between Picasso and Manzoni, and you had different motivations in organizing each of those exhibitions. I wonder if you can explain sort of the differences, and especially with Manzoni.
Yes, of course. So Picasso, the first Picasso exhibition that the gallery put together was called Mosqueteros. Mosqueteros, that means musketeers, is a series of work that Picasso painting in the last 10, 15 years of his career. And the gallery had already operated there, and that was undoubtedly an interest of Larry. So exhibition had already been organized, but I would say never at that scale. So I had met John Richardson when I was working. John Richardson was Picasso's biographer, a very fascinating character. You know, he was this old gay man who had met John Richardson when he was living with his lover, Douglas Cooper, who was one of the first Cubist collectors in the south of France. He would go to corridas with Picasso. But anyway, I had contacted John when I was organizing an exhibition on Francis Bacon, because one of Francis Bacon and Giacometti's most important muse, Isabel Roxton, apparently was portrayed by Picasso as well. While we were researching for that exhibition, we had found out in the archives of the Tate the Isabel's unpublished diaries, in which she was saying that she was portrayed by Picasso. So we contacted John. In the end, we were not able, John was not able to figure out which these portraits were. But we became friends, and with Larry, we thought it would be a very good idea to hire John and ask him to curate the first exhibition at the gallery. It was a first for many reasons, I think. First of all, Picasso's latest production had not been seen in New York. The exhibition opened in 2009, yes. And Picasso's late exhibition production had not been seen in New York since 1984, when the Guggenheim had organized a show. So it was really indeed a subject and an area with a lot of potential, in terms of critic rediscovery, because until that moment, I think Picasso's late production was considered inferior to the rest of his huge production. Picasso died at 91, and he was indeed very prolific. He would sometimes paint one painting a day. And also in terms of market, because, again, it was a market that had not fully developed. So we embarked on this enterprise. That exhibition was built mainly on the collection of Bernard Picasso, who is Picasso's grandson, but we were able to have loans from all the members of the family, plus important loans from the museum. I think one of the key to the success of that show was the fact that it was mounted in Chelsea. Chelsea is the place, probably most of you are familiar, where the most contemporary art spaces are. So the fact of seeing Picasso's production in a place where you would usually see Jeff Koons' latest sculpture or paintings, or Cindy Sherman, or Sarah's, or Jenny Savile's, had created really a clash that was very interesting and made Picasso appear fresh. The exhibition was an incredible success. We also asked Annabel Zeldorf, who is the architect that has just redesigned the Frick collection and who became a dear friend too, to design the layout of the show. I remember there were lines around the block. and we had more than, I think, 100,000 visitors, which for an exhibition in a private gallery is unprecedented. So at the same time, because I didn't have enough work with one exhibition, so at the same time, I proposed Larry to do an exhibition of Piero Manzoni. Piero Manzoni, as you probably know, is one of the key figure of post-war art, not only in Italy, but in Europe. It was a time when artists were really redefining what a painting was. It was the time when, well, Fontana was a little bit older than, Fontana is the guy who slashed the canvas, was a little bit older than Manzoni, but artists were indeed looking at new ways to, they were looking at new ways of conceiving paintings. If you think of Klein also, who patented this blue color. So Manzoni's invention is the achrome, which is a canvas devoid of color, a canvas that he would imbue in kaolin. Kaolin is a substance similar to porcelain that is used in the production of porcelain. He would pleat the canvas and let the canvas dry to achieve its final form by itself. So this idea that works of art are autonomous entities. Then Manzoni, who died at 29, but was indeed pushing the boundaries and opening and paving the way to conceptual art, produced many other important works, one of which is the notorious Merda d'Artista, Artist Shit. So he produced 1990 cans of his own feces, and each can contained 30 grams. And what I think was genius is that they were sold at the daily price of gold. So this association between shit and gold, I think, was really it's something people in the art world still talk about.
Yeah.
So
is that very Italian? It seems quite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, Maurizio did this golden toilet. Maurizio Catalan did this golden toilet. And Manzoni was one of my passions, and he had never had an exhibition in a retrospective in America, which I thought was quite shocking. His market was on the rise, and so Larry told me, yeah, do it. Then, of course, with Larry, you have to bring results. But I was given the freedom and the incredible privilege to put together such an exhibition. I asked Germano Celand, who was the author of the two Manzoni's catalog, Raisonnés, to come and curate it. And we put together an exhibition that won prizes. It was listed by Art Forum as one of the best exhibitions of the year. And also in terms of because one question would be, why galleries that are not museums put together these exhibitions that are super expensive? And indeed, they are super expensive. But I think it's also a way, of course, to find a space in a market where they have not been active, but also to build prestige. And prestige in a global market is a very potent tool. I remember when Rudy Stingel joined the gallery, and with whom I would work, he told me that one of the reasons is he decided to join the gallery after having seen the Manzoni exhibition. So also, if you think for a contemporary artist, it's super cool that your show is before or after a Picasso show. So there are many reasons why galleries put together this exhibition, but undoubtedly this is and this is why I dedicated a chapter to the subject. This is when boundaries between public institutions and museums are being blurred by the gallery activity.
It's funny because I thought that those two exhibitions were very different, but now when I'm listening to you speak about them, there was an intention to sort of reintroduce a body of work into the market.
Yes, indeed. It was, and I can say that the impact particularly, well, first of all, the exhibitions were conceived in 2007 when the market and the world was at its peak, and then they happened in 2009 when the financial crisis were hitting really hard. It was very difficult to sell anything. But the impact on Picasso, the impact on the way we look now at Picasso's latest production was really remarkable, because since that moment, works by Picasso started really to late works by Picasso to achieve the big prizes at auction. I think after 6 months after our exhibition, Christie's put a Mosqueteros on the cover of their evening sale. So the impact was undoubtedly very strong, both on a critical, public, and market point of view. So it really, particularly for Picasso, it really, I think, moved the market for that section of Picasso's production.
I mean, it's sort of that sort of prestige exhibition, the museum exhibition in a gallery space, in a contemporary gallery. It's part of Larry's model, right? It's part of the Gagosian model to do that. What fascinates me about the book is that we think of art history as a chronology of innovation. And what you do is you show that, in fact, the market is a chronology of innovations as well, with many different models. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about some of those models sort of in progress. Since you start in the Middle Ages and you end up with NFTs being mined by data centers, right?
I know.
You cover a lot of ground.
And I actually thought of starting with ancient Greece, but yeah, in the Middle Ages, art, the main commissioner of art was the church. And this is because after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, in 476, actually, the Western world is in total chaos, because the Roman Empire had secured an administrative system, roads where people and goods could travel. So it was a very ordered world. When the so-called barbarian population started to push and, to overcome the borders and to conquer parts of what was the empire, the world as it was known ended. And with that ended also, for example, the production of art, because there were not buyers anymore. Also, the skills that you would learn in a workshop were not taught. The life, people abandon cities that were not safe anymore, and they go to the countryside where at least they could find, they could find food. They could cultivate it, what they would eat. So it's a moment of really chaos. Is a seismic event, and the church, the Catholic Church that by Constantine had been allowed to be practiced and was not persecuted anymore, occupied this vacuum. And for the church, art had two main functions. A, building venues where the population of the faithful could gather and pray, and B, to convey the message of God, the gospel, to an illiterate population. Very few people knew how to read, and also the mass was in Latin. So all these beautiful apparatus of mainly sculptures in the Romanesque and Gothic churches had a precise function. Then, so the church was the main commissioner, and at the time, the status of the artist was really that of an artisan. Most of them didn't sign their works. The works were anonymous. It is only around the year 1000, when life goes back to the cities, when money that basically the monetary economy had collapsed. When the monetary economy takes up again, that urban bourgeoisie with the means of buying art develops. The subject is still religious, but is when we see in paintings, the patrons that is represented between the Madonna and Christ. So, and that, particularly in Italy, would then bring to the flourishing, the fantastic flourishing of the Renaissance, when Italy was divided in small states, and they basically competed in many ways, military, but also in who was able to produce the best art, because art was clearly understood as a mean of, as a tool of propaganda and as a tool of prestige. Naturally, the Medici family, that are the prototype of the patrons, and they were surrounded by artists. They would pay for the production of works of art, but also in Rome, if you think Giulio II in particular, that I mentioned before, that at some point calls Michelangelo, Raphael, and Bramante to work for him. So Raphael was frescoing his private apartment while Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel. And the Sistine Chapel is a very interesting story, because Giulio II asked and lured Michelangelo, who was working in Florence, to go to Rome to sculpt his tomb. It was very common at the time that living kings, and the Pope was indeed also a king, to ask for the building of, to project their tomb before they died. So Michelangelo was very excited, and Michelangelo was mainly a sculptor at the time. And in fact, there are letters by him in which he says, "Io non son pittore, I'm not a painter." So he goes to Carrara to choose. He spent 6 months there in the quarries to choose the pieces of marble. And then when he goes back, the Pope had changed his mind. And this is because in the Sistine Chapel, that had been frescoes before, had cracks in the vault. And so he asked Michelangelo to do that. And Michelangelo was very reluctant. Also, he was not familiar at all with the fresco technique that, as you know, requires really technical skills, because you have to apply the paint on the wet plasters so that it basically melts, penetrates the plaster, and then when it dries, it fixes forever, but you cannot make corrections. So Michelangelo was not happy. Then, of course, he had to accept. I mean, at the end, it was the Pope asking. He accepted the commission, and he produced between 1508 and 1512 one of the masterpieces, I think, of human production.
Almost by accident.
By accident, exactly.
So after the patronage model of the church, you write chapters about how the art market changed during the Dutch Golden Age.
Yes. So another turning point that happens in Holland during the 17th century in what is called the Dutch Golden Age. And this happens because religious circumstances change. A guy that you probably know, Martin Luther, Augustinian monk, starts in 1517 when he nails the 95 theses that were criticizing the operate of the church, and in particular the selling of the indulgences. An indulgence is the remission of the sins if you by paying a certain amount of money. And during the pontificate of Leo X, had really escalated to unprecedented price. by the way, Leo X was trying to raise money for the construction of St. Peter. But anyway, so Luther criticized this. He didn't envisage at the time that he would really trigger the fact that the Christian world would split between Catholic and Protestant, but this is what happened through very bloody wars. And in Holland, that during the 17th century became a republic and a Protestant country, the model changed. Why? Because, first of all, the church is not a patron anymore. The church, the cardinals, all the people around that, and also because it's a republic, again. So those who want art are a different social class. So Dutch artists really have to reinvent themselves for a public that is a bourgeois, mercantile public. And this has two consequences. First of all, the fact that new genres are invented or developed in a different way. So, for example, this is when landscape is born. Landscape, until that moment, had only been the setting of historical or mythological stories. Now, Dutch artists begin to paint the landscape that they see around us and interior scenes. So basically, is the mercantile, the bourgeois world that want an artist in which they could reflect themselves, in which they could be proud of what they had achieved. Holland, although had a population of only 2 million people, becomes the richest country in Europe. And what is very interesting is that wealth is very much distributed. That means that also working classes become potential buyers of art. It has been, for example, estimated that on average in the town of Delft, that is the town where Vermeer operated, household had on average 11 works of art. Those works of art were not produced on commission, but for a free market. So artists specialized in certain genre, but I don't know the word. For example, artists specialized in winter landscapes. And those paintings were being sold in fairs, they were being sold by the guilds, they were being sold in taverns sometimes. But it's the first time when a free market, meaning a market not on commission, develops.
Another thing about the Dutch age, you brought up Vermeer. One of the things that I love about your book is that you include so many women in the chronology of the market. Women are too often left out of the story of art history that has begun to be corrected in the past 50 years or so, but we still have a long way to go. Whereas in your book, you describe women patrons, women dealers. In fact, Vermeer's primary patron was a woman, right? Yes. Can you talk to me a little bit about your decision for that, the necessity of that, and some of the favorite women that you wrote about?
Yes. Well, the necessity is because history has to be addressed. Women have been marginalized in every field, and being an artist, as you are saying, until probably 50 years ago, was much more difficult for a woman than for a man. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, women could not have an education. They could not access academy. They could not be members of the guild. So the few women that actually became artists were many times daughters of artists. For example, Artemisia Gentileschi, she's a Baroque painter, that is one of the most successful one. Also, she has become a feminist icon because she was raped, and we have the the papers of the trial of her assaultant that still survive. She was the daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, who was a follower of Caravaggio. So, for example, in the Giorgio Vasari's lives, Giorgio Vasari wrote this seminal book in 1550 called The Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors. He only, in the first edition, he only lists one woman, and a few more in the second edition, simply because they didn't exist. So I indeed try to highlight their doing when I found them, and also of, as you are saying, of patrons, for example, Isabella d'Este, who during the Renaissance was an incredible promoter of the arts and of literature, and of dealers. For example, I would like to give you two examples that I think are very telling. One is the fact that the market and the legacy of Van Gogh was indeed created by a woman who was his sister-in-law, right? Yeah, sister-in-law. She was, as you know, Van Gogh died in 1890, and he had sold probably only one painting. Now scholars tend to think that he was on the brink of becoming more recognized, but it's true that a market for him didn't exist. So his brother, Theo, who had been Vincent's supporter, died 6 months after. So the task of promoting and creating a legacy for Van Gogh really fell on the shoulder of Joanna, who was 28 years old, who inherited all these paintings that virtually had no value at the time. And she very cleverly strategized her doing in two different directions. One was to create alliances with different dealers to organize exhibitions in which only a part of the works were for sale, so to create desire. And the other was, and that was really a very successful intuition, to publish the letters that are more than 800 that Van Gogh had written, mainly to his brother. Because, you know, as Durand-Ruel had understood that in order for the Impressionists to be successful, people needed to understand what they were doing, Joanna understood that for the public to understand and like Van Gogh, it was important to understand what there was behind, who the man Van Gogh was. So Joanna kept always a part of the paintings that became the core of what is now the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. So maybe Van Gogh would have been discovered anyway, but it is true that is the doing of this young woman and her courage and her pioneering intuition that made Van Gogh legacy and market such a success. The other one is Berthe Weil. Berthe Weil was a dealer at the beginning of the 20th century. She was a Jewish woman of very limited means, but who has opened a tiny gallery that was the only venue devoted only to contemporary artists. And indeed, Berthe Weil sold the first works by Picasso when Picasso arrived at 19 years old in Paris. And she exhibits, for example, Picasso's blue paintings for the first time. And she gave first exhibition to a lot of artists who would become superstars, like Matisse, Derain, and of course, they eventually all left her. And she never really had the money to expand her activity, but she really had a pioneering role at the time.
No, I found it fascinating that in the 1950s, 40s and 50s, you're speaking about Peggy Guggenheim and Betty Parsons, and then we get into Virginia Dwan and very powerful women dealers giving opportunities to painters, and yet you have a fantastic painter, Lee Krasner, who is overshadowed by her husband and ignored at the time. But also the women painters of that time didn't want to be known as women painters, right? They wanted to be accepted as just painters, period. So it's a tricky kind of situation.
Yeah, no, indeed. And by the way, Lee Krasner, as Michael said, was Jackson Pollock's wife. She was coming from a working class Jewish family, so her path to become an artist was particularly arduous. And she married Jackson Pollock, and she really devoted herself to help his career and his addiction with alcohol. And she was herself a very talented artist. And the Metropolitan Museum is the Met, right? Is gonna have in the fall an exhibition in which Pollock and Lee Krasner are gonna be paired together. But indeed, for her, it was much more difficult to be recognized. And we are talking about artists that are part of the abstract expressionist movement. That is a movement that develops immediately after the Second World War, and this is the moment when the epicenter of the art world moves from Paris to New York, and where, as you were saying, the activity of pioneering dealers is fundamental in the affirmation of the new language, which is considered also the first original American language that is not subservient, that doesn't that doesn't try to imitate or doesn't have this sense of inferiority towards European styles. And indeed, Peggy Guggenheim is the one that gave Jackson Pollock his first exhibition opportunities, followed by Betsy Parsons. So indeed, if one look, there are a lot of women that made their mark despite the many difficulties and obstacles that they have to overcome, both as artists and as dealers.
I was going to say, how are we doing for time? Should we see if there's some questions?
Yes,
Does anyone have any questions in the audience that they would like to ask?
Microphone here. Thank you.
For me, thank you. Did you notice any major change with the advent of abstract art in terms of market?
You mean now or?
L'avvento dell'astrattismo ha cambiato qualcosa in termini di mercato?
I think that every time that there is a new language, it takes time for the public to absorb and to recognize, and so for a market for it to establish. But I wouldn't say in particular abstract art is a turning point. If you think, Cubism, it took time to Cubism to be recognized. It took time, as we have seen, to the Impressionism to be recognized and accepted. So every major change requires a re-education of the public, and this is why what I follow in my book requires pioneers, dealers that believe and really push and sustain this new language.
I'm curious in the book how you write about the most recent 30 or 40 years of the art market. And I know you probably teach an entire class on that, but how do you treat that period?
Okay, in the book, I actually, as my book is mainly organized by models, so basically when the gallery model establishes itself, I analyze how it is fundamental and central to the affirmation, of Picasso first and modernism in Paris, and then in America, abstract expressionism, pop art. Then I analyze two challenges to this model. One, which is a minor challenge, but is what we discussed before, the chapter called Blurring the Boundaries. So when the gallery expands its doing in a territory that was the territory of museums and institutions, and the other one that is called Breaking the Rules, when Damien Hirst organized in 2008 an auction of works fresh from the studio. He gave Sotheby's more than 200 works. And that was unprecedented because usually the model is new production exhibited in galleries and then collector consign works to the auction. So the model of, so it never happens that artists consign and use auctions as their primary arena where to sell. Also because the gallery has a function of validation, has a function of creating value. And in fact, what is very interesting is that the auction was incredibly successful. I think I was in Russia with you, Melissa, and Larry when it happened. The auction was very successful. Everything was sold. In the meantime, the following day, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and that was the beginning of the financial crisis. But yes, exactly. But what is interesting is that then Damien's market, the secondary market, was quite badly hit. So his primary market continued to perform quite well, but the fact of introducing all those works all together without a gallery validation was a model that basically the market rejected. In my last chapter, I talk about what I see happening is more, a lot of question marks. So the influence, for example, of social media, particularly, I think, in the creation of consensus, or the fact that not many artists, but some artists decide to not just work with a gallery, but to be held by artist agencies, or AI, how is that going to affect the market? To be honest, we don't know how that is going to affect our lives in general. A very important shift that is going to happen is really the fact that baby boomers are supposed to pass on more than, I think, $84 trillion to their heirs. So there will be a transfer of money that is going to affect taste, is going to affect also, I think, behaviors, because although I think that the gallery model is still central to the market and the system of art, it's true that the way the new generation looks for information is much more varied through social media, through different channels. I mean, when I arrived in New York in 2002, going to a gallery was the only way to see what was going on in the art world. It's not like that anymore. So I think there are a lot of elements that are like clashing and interacting now. Where the art world is going, I don't know. What the model of the future is going to be, I don't know. I hope that it will be an inclusive model. My personal relationship with social media and with social is that I'm not part of any of them. I don't post, I'm not of any of them. But I think it's interesting to see that there are changes going on, and changes ultimately are always, I think, positive, always pushes us beyond our borders.
I think you write quite elegantly about social media in the last chapters of the book, because it's not only affecting collecting and how we know about art, but it's affecting younger artists and how they make art and what they make art for. I even think there was a piece in the Times this week about the fact that food now is more colorful because people take pictures of their meals before they eat them, right? And so you want to make food that looks good on Instagram. It's a bizarre thing, but yeah, you write about that quite a bit. In the
Yes, I do. For example, I think that figurative art is in general, I'm generalizing, but is now more successful than abstract art because it's more Instagrammable. And this is something that an artist told me, and is actually true. So the fact that the way we perceive and we look at art is different, of course, has of course affects what art is successful and what is less successful. So there is undoubtedly, even, if you still buy at a gallery, and galleries are indeed, from Art Basel reports, the venue where people buy art or at auction, the way they get the information and they elaborate the information has changed, and it's not just through one channel. You don't post either, man.
I think with the last remarks of Valentina, when she says, for 3 times, I don't know, she showed her wisdom, that after having studied this topic for years, in depth, there are still many open questions, maybe for the next book. We definitely enjoyed reading your book, Valentina, and we tremendously enjoyed the conversation with you and Michael, and we're very grateful. Thank you to Michael Cary and Valentina Castellani. Thank you to all of you for being present, in particular the many of you who are Valentina students here at NYU. And I remind you that there are copies of Valentina's book, Trading Beauty, Art Market Histories from the Art to the Gallery, upstairs for you to buy and for her to sign. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.